We're going to get started with a panel over here if anyone wants to participate and listen to that. We have limited seating, and I know it's hot, so I like this little shade posse that's accumulating. That's a positive move. If we haven't met, my name is Lindsay Preston Zappis. I am the founder, executive director, and editor-in-chief of Carla. If you don't know Carla, we are a little over 11 years old. We've been publishing a quarterly art publication about LA's art and artists, in print every few months for over 11 years. And we continue to do so and are trying to build an archive of our city, tell the stories of our city, which it feels really fitting to be in Lauren's space today because I think her project is so much about that too. I want to thank everyone at Sister Dreamer for helping us coordinate this event. We feel really honored and lucky to be here today. This event was also supported in part by the City of LA and the Pasadena Art Alliance. And it's a celebration of our newest issue, which I see a lot of you holding. They're everywhere, so make sure you grab one of these. This is our issue 45. Let's see. The magazine typically is distributed around LA too. So if you're looking to find Carla after today, you can find it in art spaces around our city. And in the magazine, there's a list of where you can find it. So you can always check that out. Okay. What else do I have to say? I'm going to get to the panelists in a moment here. I also want to thank a few of our other funders who didn't support this event in particular, but just have been highly supportive across the year. So Warhol Foundation, California Art Coalition, Critical Minded, Getty, LA County Arts and Culture, as well as advertisers for the support of our work. And I also want to shout out our Club Carla members. I know we have some of them here today for ongoing support. Sorry, this dress is flying away today. Ongoing support of our work. As members, you get access to events that we do that are just for our members. Things like studio visits, gallery tours, gallery hops, and often little special moments at our events as well. We have little carve-outs for our members. So if that sounds like an interesting community and you're interested in Carla and kind of want to dive in more, we also will mail you a subscription as part of your membership. Talk to Brandon at the merch table, and he can tell you more about. I love how he just waved just for me. No one was looking at you, Brandon. But Brandon can tell you more about the membership, and we'd love to have you explore the art world with us in that way. I want to thank all of our awesome volunteers today. We have volunteers posted up in the front, merch table, bar. So give them a thanks. They just volunteered their time. Woo! Our amazing Carla team, who's also all over the place. Evan Nicole Brown, who we'll hear more from in a minute. Sierra Burton and Paige Glover at the front. Really hugely supportive in this event and doing most of the planning themselves. So give it up for the team. This was incredible. All right. So today's conversation, we wanted to do really in line with the theme of this issue that's launching today. It's really an issue that looks at LA's artistic past to better understand our present and our future. And as Carla crafts a contemporary archive of LA's art and artists, it's always been essential for me that we also reflect back to our city's histories and creative legacies. So across this issue, we're going to tease out stories to unearth practices that have really shaped LA's iconic legacy of freedom and experimentation. And as the late Betty Saar says in this issue, it's important to acknowledge the past because it influences the present and hopefully the future. More on Betty in a moment. But today's conversation pairs 3 Carla writers with 2 of the subjects that they wrote about. So this is a really unique format to kind of have writer and subject together. Moderating this conversation is Carla's managing editor, Evan Nicole Brown. Evan! Evan is an LA-born writer, editor, and journalist who covers arts and culture. Her work has been featured in Architectural Digest, Dwell, Frieze, Getty Magazine, LA Times Image, New York Times, T Magazine, and elsewhere. And Carla, hello. Yes. She's also the founder and host of Group Chat, a conversation series and creative salon in LA. And for this issue, Evan was so honored and lucky to interview Miss Betty Saar, the incredible artist that Evan was in conversation with. Miss Saar recently passed away on July 26th at the age of 99. So we are extremely honored to be publishing one of her last interviews. And we really wanted to dedicate this whole conversation to Miss Saar and her incredible legacy, which I think will kind of inform the spirit of the conversation here today. And I'm sure we'll have ripple effects for years to come. So, on that note, this brings me to one of our panelists, Alexandria Ryahl, who is an interdisciplinary artist, writer, and the associate director of Roberts Projects in LA. What's up, Alexandria? She has supported gallery exhibitions, including the recent Let's Get It On, The Wearable Art of Betty Saar, as well as Betty Saar Mojo Tech, among others. She's contributed to many Betty initiatives, like the Betty Saar Legacy Group, a coalition of leading scholars and esteemed curators from global institutions dedicated to preserving, interpreting, and advancing Saar's profound artistic legacy, as well as a Catalog Resonate project. So Alexandra is here today kind of speaking on behalf of Miss Saar, and I really appreciate you being here and kind of holding her legacy forward for this. Much appreciation to you. Next, we have Jessica Simmons-Reid. Jessica has been a longtime Carla writer and friend, but she's also a writer, critic based in LA, and Joshua Tree. Her writing has appeared in Artforum, Carla, Freeze, Momus, and the New York Times. And she's a 2024 recipient of AICA's Young Critic Prize. And for this issue, she wrote an essay about Lita Albuquerque, a longtime force in LA who pushes boundaries between time, our bodies, and the natural world. This dress, you guys. Let's see. Jessica's on-site interviews with Albuquerque in the high desert offer an intimate glimpse into the artist's practice and deep connection with the natural world. And Jessica's the only one up here without an artist by her side, so she's going to hold it down for Lita today. Next, we have Reuben Merringer here, who's an LA-based artist, writer, and educator, who teaches at Art Center College of Design. And for this issue, he wrote an essay looking at LA's history of experimental sound, specifically highlighting SASAS, or Society of the Activation of Social Spaces Through Art and Sound, which was founded by Cindy Bernard. Which finally brings me to Cindy Bernard. So Cindy very generously drove up from the desert to join us today. And Cindy is a post-conceptual artist, activist, musician. Her work is in collections of MoMA, the Whitney, LACMA, among others. And she has received accolades from Guggenheim, Pollock Krasner, Creative Capital, and others. Until 2019, she lived in LA, where for 20 years she directed SASAS. And all of these histories I'm talking about are in this issue. So I'm so excited to have everyone, after this conversation, dive in, read more about Cindy's work, Betty's work, Lita Albuquerque's work, and all these amazing histories that really inform LA. After this conversation, we are going to continue with party and drinks and some music. So please stick around. Don't forget to grab a free issue of the magazine. And we're also going to do a short Q&A at the end of this conversation. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Evan, who will be moderating this conversation to dive into this dialogue about LA's unique histories. Thank you again for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everybody. So just to dive in, I think this theme of LA history, something I've been reflecting on, as we all have, is that, each era of art kind of has a different spirit to it and informs work being created in that moment. And so my first question is for you, Cindy. With the founding of SASAS, I'm curious why you think LA was the right environment for a project like SASAS to really live and take flight. And sort of, I'm curious too, what the culture was like here in 1999 when you founded it that sort of made you feel like it was possible to build something like it.
Well, I think, well, first of all, it was not a planned thing. So there wasn't really an assessment of what was happening in LA at that particular moment in time when it started. What I did recognize when I did my first event, which was not SASAS, it was, a mixture of artists and experimental musicians at Angels Gate Park in San Pedro. And where I mixed artists and musicians by pulling their names out of the hat. So you had these trios that were kind of peculiar, like a trio with Gabby Strong, Joe Potts, and Francis Stark. And that was about facilitating relationships between two parties, artists and experimental musicians, and seeing if we could facilitate those relationships, what that might look like. SASIS was formed out of the Sound Music series. At that time, it seemed like there were not many spaces for that kind of practice. And so we started in San Pedro at a coffee shop. And we eventually moved to the Schindler House and produced several concerts there. And I think part of it was unique. Because it combined an idea about site specificity with experimental art and sound practices at that time. I don't think people were thinking about experimental music as something that could be site-oriented, but I thought about it that way. And I was also thinking a lot about non-hierarchical space, just like this. So that's where that came from. Sorry about the length.
Yeah, no, thank you. And jumping back a bit in time, so that was the 90s, like early 2000s. But in the 60s and 70s, Miss Betty Saar, Alexandria, was a part of LA's Black Arts movement, which was significant. We also have an essay on Gallery 32, which was founded by Suzanne Jackson, self-funded, totally independent in the Granada buildings. And she showed some of Betty's work before many institutions did. So I guess I was wondering with you, Alexandria, did you learn anything from working with Betty and working like on her, like looking at her career or from being in her archives about how the LA art community was really functioning around that time in the 60s and 70s when like a lot of Black artists were like making work collaboratively. But yeah, just kind of any thoughts you have on that about that time period here too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Betty has very extensive archives, which I know in your article she mentioned how she saves everything, she collects everything. That's part of being an assemblage artist. And part of those archives includes an interview she did with UCLA for an oral history project, documenting African American artists in Los Angeles. You can find it online if you just Google Betty Saar, UCLA oral history. And Suzanne Jackson was also interviewed along with like Noah Purifoy, Alonzo Davis, people who, like Suzanne, created exhibition spaces to create opportunities for Black artists in LA to exhibit their work, meet each other, meet collectors and curators, and really just share resources. And Betty talked about that a lot in the oral history interview. And that's how she met people like Suzanne Jackson, also Samela Lewis, who opened a gallery, I think called Contemporary Crafts Gallery. And these relationships developed organically, but they became very supportive, long-lasting relationships between artists and curators that really championed each other's work. Like in 1977, Betty went to Festac in Lagos, which was, it's a really long acronym, but like the annual World Festival of Arts and Culture of the African Diaspora. And Samela nominated her to be part of the visual arts cohort. So that's just one example of the ways that, you know, this community of artists came together and really supported each other. And then thinking about how things have changed since then, I think they've changed really dramatically. I think, you know, a lot of us can speak to that just from being in the art world, whether you're just like an art enthusiast or you're a collector or you're an artist or an arts writer. I would say the biggest difference is that the art world has really become so much more globalized. Whereas, you know, in the 1960s and 70s, it was very local, which is both good and has some consequences to it. And the same can be said of globalization of the art world. But I would say it's also created more opportunities for artists, non-Western artists, to have their work seen on a much larger stage. Things like the Venice Biennale, the Sao Paulo Biennale, and yeah, it's It's changing. I want to really just emphasize how many more people are able to participate or engage through this like globalized development of this industry.
Absolutely. And I like thinking about toggling between the globalization, but also the importance of site specificity, like, you know, and looking at Los Angeles in particular, because Jessica, I know that you met with Lita many times and worked with her, and you talk in your essay about the magic of her site-specific work and how it's so powerful that it is like tied to the earth and the land and like the setting in which it's made. And so did you learn anything from her about the significance of working within a particular environment or sort of honoring the land you're creating work in, whether that's LA or any of the places she's installed work?
So much. Is this working? Can you hear me?
Not really. You want to try mine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This always happens to me. There we go. I really learned a lot being on site with Lita. One of the really fascinating things she said about site-specific work, and she's done this all over the world, is it's allowed her to think about the earth in the round and experience the earth itself as this sort of sculptural, can you hear me now? Okay. Sculptural object. And when I was on site with her in the desert, she was still working through these two earthworks across two different locations in the Mojave. And at the time, they both consisted of similar work. And so it was a pigment circle embedded into the ground, and it was powdered ultramarine pigment, similar to what's on the cover of the issue. And in one site, you know, in her mind, it was working pretty well. In the other site, it wasn't working. And it was really interesting to see how she negotiated this idea of this ephemeral piece in a site that's supposed to be, you know, at the whims of the landscape, and it's supposed to change, and the elements are supposed to kind of do what they will with it. It was interesting to find out that there is still this very specific subjective artistic criteria that's dictating those decisions. And I've really learned that there's a point when you're working with the landscape and it becomes very symbiotic, and the unpredictable nature of it is something that creates the work and, you know, allows that magic to happen. But then there's a moment when the landscape's pushing against you and you become an intervening force, and it's no longer this moment of symbiosis. You know, the gestures aren't materializing the way that she wanted them to. And I really enjoyed seeing her negotiate that process and realizing that when she works, she's really intuitive. She makes decisions with her body, and she's so in tune with the idea that the body itself carries this deep wisdom and knowledge in the same way that the landscape does. But at the same time, in earthwork, it's a very logistical undertaking. It requires a lot of conceptualization and planning, and there's a logic to it. And what happens when those two things kind of conflict? And I really enjoyed being able to speak with her about that in real time. And so the way I saw the installation at the time is not going to be the final product. So that was a special moment to see, and it will, at least at that site, it will be more of a performance. But she's still working through the process. You know, the work will debut in November, so it's still very much in flux.
Yes. Thank you. Can I trade that?
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. That's so fascinating. Yeah. I also, jumping a bit to you, Reuben, it's something you invoked in your essay on SASAS that I really appreciated was you talked about the light and space movement of California as being related to ideas surrounding sound, atmosphere, and performance. And I'm wondering how you think SASAS achieved this connection and sort of made it manifest through the programming.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you know, I think about origin stories a lot, and whether it's for movements or individual artists. And the origin story that I read about, you know, for Light and Space, specifically James Turrell and Robert Irwin, it was actually a sonic experience that they shared together in UCLA's anechoic chamber when they were both doing LACMA's Art and Technology Fellowship. And an anechoic chamber is where you walk in and, you know, there's no echoes whatsoever. It can be very disconcerting for people. A lot of people can't stay in there for very long, and it can really shatter your sense of perception. And after they walked out of that experience, Robert Irwin, who was, they were interested in removing perception and seeing what that does to conscious experience. And Robert Irwin said that everything was animated after that. Just, houses even seemed like they were alive and in motion. And that attention to perception and how, a space can be activated and affected, I think it carries through in the DNA of Sassis and a lot of sound art, especially when you're in a room sharing it with a lot of other people, some sort of non-lexical sonic vibration that's occurring that's everyone's sharing, but it's completely changing the way that you look at the room. And once that experience might end, you might step out and the world might sound a little bit different and might look a little bit different too. And so I think with Sassis programming, with its attention towards social spaces and recontextualization, I think it follows that lineage of light and space, but then also carries it further in this spirit of community, like it's in Susan Jackson's space, where these experiences are very communally experienced. Whereas when I think of a light and space experience, I feel like it's very much more isolated and internalized, whereas experiencing sound art, you have those moments that you share with people around you, and you might kind of like connect and have that experience, like, oh my God, what just happened? And you have that conversation afterward. And so I think that it follows in the lineage of light and space, but then also kind of has this communal approach as well that is very, very necessary for a sound practice, especially when you're dealing with, noise ordinances and that sort of thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's a nice connection too, back to you, Jessica, with Lita. I know also you wrote about how, when she was earlier on in her time as a professor at Art Center, and was really pioneering the land art and light and space movements in the early days, like, she wasn't, I feel like a lot of the theme of this issue is that people aren't necessarily like legible in the time they're creating something new or really trying to make something more experimental manifest. And so I really, especially for women artists, I find that so beautiful to like have the courage to keep making work and keep your vision alive, even when it's not being necessarily like well received or maybe it's a bit misunderstood. And so, yeah, I'm thinking to that history in her early years, but also now that you've seen her work, like working on contemporary pieces and new pieces, like the prints at in the High Desert. What was it like for you to sort of observe an elder artist deep in her practice, but sort of use the same channel she's been using for years, but kind of apply it in new ways and collaborate with new collaborators?
Should we switch mics, or can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Great. I'm actually really glad you brought up Robert Irwin a minute ago, because Lita was a student of his, and he had a pretty large influence on her. And what you said about the light and space movement being about perception kind of being removed and it becoming its own phenomenon, I think for her what makes her work unique is that becomes a mystical or spiritual experience as opposed to a scientific one. And that is something, when she first started teaching at Art Center, she relayed to me that that wasn't a really welcome stance to have. The idea of spiritualism and mysticism, hermeticism, sort of a lot of ideas that we talk about now and that are becoming more institutionally accepted or even celebrated over the past years and decades. She sort of stood out for having that disposition in her work. And I think she had to kind of just keep doing what she was doing and embrace that, and it eventually paid off for her. But it was really fascinating to see how that internal sense of, I guess, like mystical awareness has guided her so much, and it still, I think, to this day guides her work and how she interacts with sight and space and her own body. And even some of the conversations we were having, we were talking about the wisdom of stones and plant drawings in the desert when they, make lines in the sand from billowing in the wind, and these really sort of beautiful poetic topics. And, at the time for her, it wasn't always celebrated.
Yeah. That reminds me of Betty too, of course. Like, I think that they share that sort of lineage and that space of mysticism and outsider art and sort of, what I really like too about the current show, Let's Get It On, Alexandria at the Gallery, is that I think it's so interesting to see Betty's also like some other early career work from her that's like lesser known than her mixed media assemblages, where we're seeing, you know, her costume designs for like the Inner City Cultural Center Theater, and we're seeing her commercial work where she was like, you know, as an artist, I had to make a living. And even though I had these ideas that were sort of more like, maybe more rooted in her conceptual like priorities, like I think that also seeing the work that she did to like feed her children and, you know, and kind of like designing book covers and album covers and things like that, and being a designer and an illustrator, it's a really powerful show for that reason. And I'm wondering what it was like, if you could just sort of take us through like curating and sort of what the process was, going through her archives and sort of choosing to frame an exhibition on her work in that way.
Sure. So the exhibition at the gallery, Let's Get It On, The Wearable Art of Betty Saar, which, by the way, this is the last week to see it. It closes Saturday, August 22nd. Please come by if you haven't already. It's an unusual exhibition for us because we're a commercial gallery, but this is an archivally driven exhibition, something that you're more likely to encounter at a museum. But given the richness of Betty's archives, we thought it would be really special to focus on this moment of her life. And as we did more research and gathered more information, we realized that it was a really influential period of time for her. Betty worked at Inner City Cultural Center from 1968 to 1971, 72. And during that time, she made some of her most best-known works. Black Girl's Window was made in 1969. Liberation of Aunt Jemima was made in 1972. So even though those works aren't directly connected to what she was doing at Inner City Cultural Center, I think it's really clear that, you know, the work that she did to support her family, to supplement her income, whether it was doing design commissions or having a salary job like she did with Inner City Cultural Center, those experiences were very influential and very impactful on her work. I wrote an essay in the exhibition catalog about the influence of, or looking at Betty's art practice through the lens of drama and through like dramatic conventions. I think maybe the strongest example of the correlation between theater and Betty's practice would be when she started working in installation in the 1980s. So even though Betty didn't, you know, really work in like stagecraft, when she's creating these installations, there are elements of stagecraft, whether it's like at Freeze LA last year, we exhibited part of an installation she created for an exhibition on Zora Neale Hurston. And it was a child's rocking chair that she had carved and embellished, but it was rigged so that it would rock back and forth on its own. It had like a hidden motor, so the chair was moving without anyone sitting in it. And things like that are just examples of how working in theater really expanded, like added new dimensions to Betty's practice. I think I got away from your question.
No, I
Did
think
I
that
got
was
it?
perfect.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
thank you. Cindy, I'm grateful to be sitting with you too as a woman artist and founder. And I know you spoke on this a little bit before, but I would just love to hear more from you on sort of like the emotions you sort of went through when you decided to found Sasas and like produced it for many, many years, and also what it felt like to make the decision to close it in 2019. Like, can you sort of take us through that journey a bit? Because I think it's significant to build something that there isn't much precedent for, and to sort of just like kind of apply however you built the infrastructure for something that was so free and experimental. I'm really intrigued by that because I assume it must have been difficult to sort of toggle between wanting it to be this like free and radical thing, but like, of course, the logistics and everything that goes into it is major. So I'm kind of curious how you navigated all that.
Are you going to hit me like this when I go rambling for too long?
The floor is yours.
No, you should do it. Please, because, I mean, it's a 20-year history. So, yeah. I mean, a lot of times these things you sort of stumble ass backwards into, so there was no real plan. But as it grew, and it wasn't just me. I mean, I had a board of directors. It became a 501c3. There's at least 50 people that have passed through the board of directors of SASIS, as well as, I should say, the staff, of which Reuben was like one of the last staff members of SASIS. So to say that it's just me is probably a bit of a, it's not. But, and many artists, including Lauren Halsey, in truth, who donated work to help support SASIS and who spoke at one of our last listening parties. So, I mean, a lot of people have passed through that organization in 20 years. And just before I forget, I'll say that the archives are online and there's a lot of videos. If you ever want to experience some of the things that happened as a part of SASIS, just go to sasis.org, which is sassas.org. And you'll be able to look at a lot of video of these past events. So sorry, now to jump backwards into trying to get back on track. Yeah, I mean, first of all, at that point, for experimental music, not a lot of women in that field, not a lot of diversity in the field. So those were some of the other challenges that we had. In terms of people, I felt it was really important to bring artists here who hadn't had an opportunity to play here for some time, some of whom were not very well known, like Kalan Phil Koran, or Joseph Jarman, who was a part of the art ensemble of Chicago, who played as a solo artist, but then I wanted to pair him with like Henry Grimes, who was a bass player who at that point had been living in a residential hotel, had just come out and with some very young people who appreciated his work. And I thought, well, Henry should play with someone from his generation. So I paired him with Joseph Jarman, and then with Alex Klein, who was from a kind of an associated but another world. So there was a lot of work going on that was about these kinds of pairings and then placing them in appropriate venues. So when I was programming work at the Schindler House, I was always very conscious of the spatialness of the house. And so that would mean that someone like Pauline Oliveros would play a concert there, but it was accordion and acoustic, because you wanted to deal with that dynamic. And I was also interested, as I said before, about this sort of non-hierarchical space, so that the audience and the performers were on the same plane. That was very important to me. And we would often then move from there and program in places like parks where things could be free. Baldwin Hills Scenic Overlook, which Reuben talks about. I think we did, do you know how many concerts we did there?
Several, but I'm not.
Several, okay. And that's where, I probably should wrap this up, probably that's where the last concert took place. And so, again, thinking back through the history of the organization, I wanted to include as many people as possible that had been a part of that history in that concert. And we had for many years used the convention of like an exquisite corpse, but the musical version of an exquisite corpse. So how many of you know what I'm talking about when I say exquisite corpse? So an exquisite corpse is, I see no's. So an exquisite corpse is a type of drawing that was founded by the Surrealist movement, and generally it is 3 parts and different parts of the body. So like the lower part of the body, the torso, and the head. And you would fold the paper in thirds. The first person would not be able to see, the first person would draw like the feet or the head, and then that piece would be folded over. The next person would draw the torso, and the next person would draw the feet or the head, depending on how you were going. And you would not be able to see what the person before you would draw. So you were drawing blindly and then creating this oddly shaped body as a collaboration between 3 or 4 people. So we would do that with sound by placing people in rooms who couldn't see each other play. And so they were overlapping each other as they performed, but it was a kind of a blind improvisation, so to speak. I started explaining that so the final concert was this massive experimental corpse spread across the landscape of the Baldwin Hills Scenic Overlook. And yeah, it was sad, but it was time because many other organizations had taken its place. And I will stop. You did not do this, but I know you
I'm
intend
enjoying
to.
it. No, but I love that you brought up too, of course, that Reuben worked on the project because also in your essay, Reuben, you talk about. Well, let me ask you this. I'm curious how being around and within SASAS how did it sort of open your eyes to the importance of alternative spaces and practices. And you also talk, too, in your piece about how many of the spaces where concerts took place have since been shuttered. And so when we think about LA history and losing access to spaces that were once occupied by concerts, for instance, how does that strike you, in terms of where we are today in LA?
It opened my eyes so wide. There's just it's phenomenal to look back at some of the venues that SASA's programming took place at, whether it was the Schindler House, which is a historically significant piece of architecture in West Hollywood, certain parks, Baldwin Hills Scenic Overlook, but then even Chungking Road in Chinatown, there's a concert where people would walk through between the improvisers that had a little brass trio going on, I remember. The importance of those alternative spaces is really key because first of all, it kind of resonates with sound itself as being this ephemeral medium. And with all of these places that are kind of disappearing, it seems like in the past month I've talked to a few people that have gallery spaces that are now switching to a nomadic model. And with that happening, and maybe this is me working too long at a design school, I see these opportunities for modularity in what people have, and whether you're a nomadic gallery space that's looking for something that you can support or platform or vice versa. I think that when it comes to alternative spaces, it's always been important in LA, wherever you can find it, where it's affordable and cheap, but if not, then you really do have to pool your resources and find communal ways to support each other and platform each other. My partner has fallen into experimental theater, and I've been seeing a lot of theater lately in black box theaters, and I've been really heartened by how much community there is within those groups, especially when they start bringing in visual artists to either Olivia Mole design, some set design for some from plays at the new theater. But I think alternative spaces, it really has a lot to do with doing whatever you can with what you have and kind of allowing for those spontaneous things if you can do it, but it requires a lot of support if you're going to organize.
Right. I also wanted to touch on, and this can be a question for anybody who has something to share, but the role of the archive in your own practice and work. Obviously, SASAS is archived online, as you shared, which is incredible. But yeah, if anybody has any thoughts on that, just kind of why archives are valuable. And I guess that sounds sort of like an overly simplistic question, but I do think it's significant to sort of really name the role archives and history play in writing, in creating, in making work.
I'm just going to say very quickly, SASAS actually is archived online, but also at the Getty. Oh, yeah. So the Getty has all of the ephemera and copies of all the tapes and everything associated with that. But I would say as a visual artist of a certain age who's organizing her archives, my archives as opposed to the SASAS archives, it's such a task. It's really hard. You begin to wonder how much history is lost just for the lack of time and resources to pull that information together. And galleries used to actually play a role in that, but with the changes in the gallery system, I'm not sure how many galleries are still playing that role for their artists. So it's really a challenge, let alone poets and experimental artists and people whose work really exists at the fringes. That stuff is really tough to deal with when it comes to longevity, and that's part of why when we started SASAS and before that the Sound Concert Series, the rule was we tape everything. We photograph everything to make sure that this practice that so many people are on the margins, that it has a life beyond when the organization shutters.
I would like to add just that working at Robert's Projects as Betty Saar's exclusive gallery representation, the gallery began digitizing her archives in 2016 and processing materials to add to a catalog raison of her work and exhibitions. Just because the value of the archive is really priceless, not just as a resource for things like the exhibition, Let's Get It On, which is very archivally driven, but also as a resource for writers, scholars, art historians, students. So it's still a big project. There's a lot of material to go through, and we hope to share it with people one day because there's so much amazing material in there.
And just real quickly, like the value of a good archive is that if it's like if it's put together really well and it's linked well, it becomes like a node for other archives. Like one archive is actually part of a network of archives. So like going into the SASIS archive, for example, which had 20 years of programming, that programming itself was reaching back decades into sonic history too. So once you dive into that archive, you have access to all this other stuff, which I'm sure is the same with Betty's archive as well.
Yeah, and something else that's very crucial about the collection of archives and the archiving of archives is interrelationships between people and organizations, and really great archives are taking that into account when they, if you're lucky enough to have your archive collected someplace like the Getty, they're really thinking about what is the relationship of this organization to this organization and this person to that person, so that when a historian goes in, they can look at those interrelationships, which is very key.
Maybe I'll ask you a more specific question, Jessica, to end on. But I know that unfortunately Lita lost a lot of her work in the fires in Malibu, which is devastating when we think about an archive and the history of someone's work. But I also was kind of heartened by, I feel like she used that loss as an opportunity to focus a bit more on like present and future work, which I think is really inspiring. So if you have any thoughts on that, or maybe anything you can share in terms of how she sort of transmuted that loss into something positive.
I think it's really complex because sometimes the value of an archive is revealed once it's lost, because an archive really can be, it's not infallible, it's vulnerable, and she, in the Woolsey fire, which I think was 2018, she lost her house, her studio, her archive, really everything. And I don't want to speak for her in terms of how catastrophic that obviously was, but she is, I think in general, very forward-looking with her work. She has a solo show at the Palm Springs Art Museum in November, and she'll be including some charred relics from the fire that she's never shown before, and I'm not quite exactly sure what they'll be, but I'm very interested to see how those will be juxtaposed alongside the actual work itself. And one thing too with her work is she has this character that she calls the 25th century female astronaut, and it's this person sort of guides us into the future and teaches humans the language of light, and it's a figure that has been a part of her work for a while. And so I think even with this like absolutely catastrophic loss, she does have this very kind of futuristic disposition in terms of her work. And, I think she is recovering as best she can from that loss.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. We have a little bit of time for questions if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, anyone? I'll bring the mic to you.
Hi, I have a question for you guys. I am a musician and I'm starting to get really interested in sound art and was wondering if you have any tips or advice for anybody that's starting to dip their toe in that realm.
Go to everything. Go to shows that you're interested in, support the venues that exist that are supporting that kind of experimental practice, and then afterwards go up and talk to everybody that's played and tell them that you're interested in what they're doing, and seek them out, and then go have coffee or a drink or whatever, and talk to them, because that's how you learn, and that's how you create a community around what it is you're doing.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
I couldn't do any better than that.
Yeah, that was great. And I feel like that applies for art, for so many fields. But yeah, that's awesome. Dominique, question?
Yeah, thank you guys for this wonderful panel. Archives are so special to me. I work with a lot of older artists and then, the children and families. What advice would you give, to a family member or a colleague who is, now responsible for an artist or a late, parent's work, especially if they don't have the support like Betty had, with Robert's projects, and we don't have like a real mechanism for this, especially older artists of color. Is there like a pipeline, or working with magazine or curators or writers? Like, what's a good, I'm often asked this, and I can't do it all myself, but I would love to give family members or other patrons some advice on like what to do with stuff that they have.
I can say a little bit, just from my experience working with Betty's archives and also working on the exhibition. There are a lot of resources available online, different kinds of software. Of course, it's more challenging when you don't have some kind of like external structure to guide the process, but collaborating with other people is also really generative in organizing an archive, in connecting things, in creating systems together. When we were working on the exhibition, we actually connected with someone from Inner City Cultural Center, which isn't operating as a theater anymore, but they have a board of directors, and it's more about preserving its legacy as a part of the history of Los Angeles and arts and cultural landscape. Early this year, we connected with Ernest Dillahay, who had a number of, his house, his garage had kind of become a storage unit for the archives of Inner City Cultural Center. And we spoke over the phone, we spoke over email, and he agreed to loan us his film negatives from the 1960s and 70s so we could digitize them for him in exchange for granting us permission to use those images in the exhibition and in the catalog. And Ernest didn't know what was on the film negatives. We didn't know what was on the film negatives. We thought, this could be a bunch of great images, but it could be completely unrelated to what we're working on. And what we found was better than we could have hoped for. And it really just expanded the scope of the exhibition, because we learned that Betty not only worked as a costume designer for Inner City Cultural Center, but she also appeared in a couple productions as like a walk-on role or as like a background character. So that was really special to discover that and be able to present the costume designs and the images of the productions that she designed costumes for together for the first time. So all of that is to say it's difficult, it's challenging, it's overwhelming, but there are resources available, and if you can find people to work with you in processing and organizing the archive, that in itself could kind of supplement the lack of like institutional support.
Yeah, just a couple of practical things. I think it's the Joan Mitchell Foundation that has a lot of estate organizing resources on it. So look for the just Google Joan Mitchell Foundation, and I think that's the right one. I think they have stuff there. But also the biggest thing to do for anybody that's dealing with this is photograph everything you have. Just start there. Photograph everything you have, organize it by year, and then try to create an inventory. Because before you can place anything, you kind of have to know what you have. And that's really the first step.
Other questions? Our inner circle in here, anyone? Sorry. Hey.
Hello, my name is Ajani. I have a question, I guess more so in reference for Carla Magazine. I'm aspiring to create my own magazine as well, and I was just wondering if there's like any tips or pointers for like the beginning stages of like crafting, creating, and like facilitating and maintaining like success for a magazine. Yeah.
I mean, talk to me after. There's a lot to be said, but I feel like the consistency, and I think that speaks to everyone up here. It's like they keep doing, right? And like that's hard to do because like money becomes a problem, resources, people, all of that. And I'm sure Cindy, I'm sure everyone has dealt with those same issues. But happy to answer any questions you have after. Yeah, because it's a longer, longer convo. And I have a question if no one else. Okay.
Hi, since there's advice-seeking questions, I'm like 2 years postpartum finally, and going back to my art practice, and I would love to exhibit the body of work that I've been working on for the past 2 years of pure transformation and lunatism. So I think I recently moved here to LA, and I'm looking for that opportunity to find a place to show this new work, which is in the crossover of wearable art. So the costume exhibition was very inspiring to hear about, and fashion, right? Which I conceive fashion as a way of showing one's identity, right? Creation of identity and the second skin that we choose to wear. So
Absolutely.
that's my question.
I can say a little bit to get started. I am associate director at Roberts Projects. I work at a gallery, but I am also an artist. I got an MFA, going to grad school, the whole process of it. You learn a lot about just the inner workings of being a professional artist. I'm not a full-time artist. That's not in my budget right now. But I think something that can really help get you to where you want to be is working with other artists, meeting other artists, being around other artists. You mentioned that you had moved to LA recently. So it can be challenging to find spaces and opportunities to connect with other artists who want the same thing as you. I think maybe a good place to start is if you rent a studio in a building with a lot of other artists, just being in proximity to people with a studio practice, developing relationships with them organically that are nurturing and supportive and mutually encouraging, just naturally leads to more exhibition opportunities.